Welcome. Thank you for tuning into the Clarion Content YouTube channel. On this episode, we talk about media and media sourcing and information.
We talk about architecture and community memory.
And development and place, and Durham, our roaring old place, which we share with you. So check us out, comment, hit us up on Twitter, Clarion Content, Chris Vidiello, Josh Hart. Fantastic.
So I know you want to talk about journalism and sources, and what was making me think of it was a good friend of mine in Buffalo, New York, has started basically the Indie in Buffalo. It's called The Public.
Oh, sweet.
It's a weekly arts culture newspaper, and
that should be super important down here.
Yeah.
We have so many upstate New York transplants. The Public.
Exactly. Shout out to Aaron Lowinger and
shout
his
out
whole
to
crowd.
Aaron's everywhere.
Yeah, for starting up The Public. They just started like a month ago. So, but it was interesting talking to him because we were emailing the other day just about how there are these conflicts of interest when you're a community newspaper. Basically, you're trying to figure out how to not be an ad sheet. Basically, you want to cover places, but the places you're covering are also your advertisers, probably, and you're building that network of advertisers through your coverage in a way. But you don't want to be a catalog. How do you balance these conflicts of interest when you're covering local news?
Yeah,
it's
very tricky,
difficult
for sure. I mean, at the Clarion Content, our psychology is that we just disclose from the beginning we're biased. Like, I guarantee you we're biased. And ontologically, I believe that everybody's biased. So the best thing that you can do is just concede bias. I think the Walter Concrete psychology of news coverage was facetious and a false construct that you can't cover things without caring about them. And I would much rather hear from people who care about things when they're covering them. And maybe I'm thinking a little bit more along of the Ferguson, Eric Garner, public protest kind of coverage, and how I don't want a dispassionate media. I want a passionate media that cares about what's going on. But even insofar as we're sitting in a restaurant, a coffee place that we love, and we might write about Coco Cinnamon, and they might be part of our larger world of friends and people we know. I think, the best thing that you can do is just disclose that.
Yeah.
That we like them, If they advertise with us, fantastic.
There's
if they want to sponsor episodes, if they want us to do that kind of thing, we love you, But we do love you, just like we're talking about Dashi a few weeks back, and you're saying you love ramen. And I'm thinking to myself, yeah, and I love Kelly and Billy. How many times have I been into Toast, and how great are they? I mean, and how nice and how kind, and the soup's fantastic, always. The sandwiches are great. So we can't pretend that we don't care, because that would be lying, right? And it is a tricky battle. I was thinking of it really, I read this guy, Eugene Volk. He has a blog on the Washington Post, and it's called the Volk Conspiracy, but he was talking about the Sony disclosures. The hackers have busted into Sony and taken everything from full scripts to chunks of people's emails and all kinds of different stuff. And Sony has written a letter to lots of mainstream media organizations threatening to sue them if they use this. And Volk, who's a constitutional law professor out at UCLA, says Sony is not going to win those kind of lawsuits. That long as the journalists
confidential
didn't steal them.
Information and intellectual property. I mean, it's not just, hey, I got emails out of this producer's inbox. It's also like, hey, we got rough cuts of entire feature films.
Now
right?
that they can't use.
Okay.
Things like that, they can't take whole scripts and publish those, because that violates the fair use doctrine. They would hurt the future value of the James Bond movie if they publish the whole script in advance.
Okay, but the emails between producers, and the particularly juicy ones where they're saying this actor or actress,
Adam Sandler,
dissing
is
so-and-so, that type of thing. They can
absolutely use that. And it's based on this case called Bukowski, which is and why that's important and why I wanted to talk about it. Bukowski goes back to an Ohio situation where somebody gave this radio host illegally taped conversations of union bosses threatening to beat up managers who wouldn't unionize their store. And it went all the way to the Supreme Court because the tapes were definitely made illegally. But what the court ruled was that there's a justifiable public good, a First Amendment good, in the radio host being able to use illegally taped material. Now, if he had illegally taped it himself, he would not be able to use it. But just the fact that the source illegally obtained the material. There's another one where it happens with Chris Dodd, who was a senator in Connecticut. Similar situation. His staff illegally gave out some documents about how Dodd was going to handle a particular position, how he had been influenced, what have you, and they were used by the Washington Post as part of an article, and the District Circuit Court, I believe, in D.C. ruled this time that it was okay, even though the source material had been illegally obtained. And I think that's important because it goes to stuff like, you know, the WikiLeaks kind of case and whatnot.
Yeah.
Like nowadays, if you say anything that was illegally obtained, it cannot be in the public domain. I think we'd end up in a situation where the control of information was so tight we wouldn't really know and what our public officials are doing, and whether we're thinking about it in the context of cops in Durham or development in Durham, or, you know, the government and the FBI and the CIA and how they handle everything from telephone monitoring to looking at your emails. I think it's really important that, you know, we're careful that we err on the side of the First Amendment and putting information out there.
Well, but I mean, the flip side of that is that if you're a media outlet, do you then say, hey, we're going to have to, you know, have our own sort of, you know, Huggy Bear out there getting information by whatever means and being the intermediary between the sort of, you know, legality intermediary between the things that we're covering and the way we can cover them. So in other words, you have an agent getting information by means and being the sort of legal protection between you, the media outlet that keeps your hands clean, and what you're covering that you know you have difficulty covering without getting that kind of insider information or illegally obtained information or questionably obtained information. You know, it's an interesting tactic.
It's a super complicated question and really relevant. You know, because it goes to those Apple hacks. You know, and those celebrity nude photos, and that's, you know, a certain amount of like almost iCloud that got broken into.
Okay.
But also like the Daily Mail in the UK had a similar kind of spying thing. But what they broke up was a huge child pornography ring in England that went back like 30 years and involved high government officials and lots of other people in the media and big complicit silence from hundreds of people. And they obtained that stuff, you know, almost the way you're saying, with like a spy of their own to give themselves a legal shield. And I mean, I hate to think we live in that kind of information obtaining world. What really happens at the Clarion content is more like people just tell me shit all the time, and I have to be like, all right, now remember, I'm in journalism, so like if you don't tell me it's off the record, like I want to talk to the public about what you're doing. We want to spread the positivity of story and the good things going on in Durham, and that's what I'm thinking about when we're saying Cocoa Cinnamon and you're saying advertisers and how do we make the distinction. I want to tell you the truth about what's good. I want to have that conversation, but it gets much more complicated when you get into this stuff that's bad.
And it gets complicated, and specifically in a place like Durham, and we've talked plenty about development, and development is something that often, you know, you find out about it once it's an absolutely completely done deal, and there's a lot of behind the scenes, closed door, private negotiation conversation, and the community's left out. They just get the press release at the end. Hey, this has been sold, and there's a 246 unit development project that's going to happen here, and suddenly you're like, wait, what? That's where you know the sort of Daily Mail sting operation or eyes and ears on the street really matters. Participate and contribute to the community through journalism.
Yeah, I mean, the first place I heard about the Holland Street alley going from like 40 feet wide, cobblestone, 7-star cycles was in it. You know, the arced part of the Mutual Bank building there that was so pretty. You can go look at old pictures on the Clarion content where that alley looks like you're in France. The first place I heard that they were going to cut it down to 5 feet wide was a Dirty Durham meeting. You know, someone in there was like, yo, this is happening. And the way it went down was the city and the developer had made a deal. The Historic Preservation Commission, as we can never remember, had signed off on it. And then suddenly the deal was they were going to use some of the original cobblestone to preserve a 5 to 7 foot wide alley. And like they were going to try and keep the trees that were in it. But if the trees went away, they would replant new trees. And the arc facade of that building is going to be gone when it's a new hotel. And that 70s Art Deco treasure is going to be something else, like we talked about last week, perhaps a Disneyfied or an Epcot Center version of its previous self. And the point really being that whether that's right or wrong, I mean, it may be amazing and unbelievable, and if you own the Hotel Durham and it's super cool, by all means, comment on the Clarion Content YouTube channel and tell us why. Tweet at us at Clarion Content or Chris Vidiello and tell us why your hotel is awesome. Or if you're on the Historic Preservation Committee and you want to tell us why it should have happened, we're not automatically against the idea. I think it's just more about how we didn't hear about it until it was ex post facto. The city held a public forum to comment. After that was the plan that had been agreed to with developers. So we were allowed to comment on the plan they'd already made.
Well, I think that, you know, our angle that Aaron and I share is that architecture is interesting when it's an expression of the people who live in that place, you know? I mean, like we're at Cocoa Cinnamon right now. This is a place where we had this building that sort of languished for a long time, and something of the identity, previous identity of this building was retained in this in a launch of a cafe and restaurant in the space, you know?
Similarly,
when you leave it up to
Deer Street,
developers, whether or not they're from the area or from outside the area, you know, often they have commercial interests and that are architecturally completely at odds with the previous identity of the building, especially downtown where a lot of these properties languished or had been almost abandoned.
I mean, and I think
it's a strange space, and we do lose. I mean, that alleyway was really cool,
right?
But didn't exactly have a name or
or didn't have
tag.
a super clear purpose or an absolute imperative
right?
Why we should retain it, like Liberty Warehouse. There was no absolute obvious imperative. I mean, maybe the last tobacco warehouse would have been an imperative to some people, but like Chris is saying, to the developer, the imperative was how much money I can make, because that's the paradigm, you know? Like, and when they're thinking about that, as inevitably they will, if we as a community are into things like place, and I think place is a really undervalued word, because place is not just geographic in the sense of where you are, it's geographic in the sense of when you are. Because this place wasn't the same 15 years ago, and it won't be the same 15 years from now. Much like the Jersey I grew up in, you know, doesn't look like the Jersey that is now, or the Chicago that Josh lived in is inevitably going to be different 5-10 years from now. But place and that conversation doesn't just automatically happen. It's about how, as a collective, as a group, as a society, as a civilization, even if you want to get as big as America, look at things and want to make what we are. So if the developers are going to be, it's about how much money we make, we as a collective citizenry who care about what the place is have to be involved in the discussion, and earlier rather than later, not after the Liberty Warehouse is torn down, everybody mourns it, but more like the way they did with Central Park, where they've done this fabulous job of like building a Mount Moriah and making sure the farmers market's there and making sure that herb garden that's maintained, you know, by all kinds of different Durham landscapers and is supposed to be a public bounty. You know, there's a sense where people at least got ahead of what was happening, because it would have been very easy to lose Central Park to condos the same way Liberty Warehouse went.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that chunk of land is invaluable, would be invaluable if you could raise it and put something up there, you know?
Yeah, absolutely. And we have those same kind of questions about Chicken Bone Park, right, which is over on Mangum Street right across from the Crest building. You know, is that going to be maintained as a green space? Mr. Mayor, Tom Bonifield, city manager, any word there? Are we going to get to keep that?
Yeah.
We'd like some green in downtown? I don't know. I guess, you know, the questions of journalism, I mean, we're not going to answer them all in one show here, but I think it's really important, you know, both as media guys and as citizens, to tell people it's okay to engage. I mean, I know Josh has talked about going out there and filming some of the protests that are happening in Durham, and I know that some of the best information we get on the Clarion Content is from Twitter or from other people who are just out there, boots on the ground, writing. I think the best way that you can help us or that we can help you is to have an ongoing dialogue. So
yeah, the point of journalism is multiple voices. You shouldn't just read one thing, right? You should read
absolutely.
all different points of view to get the full picture, and you should participate, which is kind of the beauty of this format, other formats online, social media. So yeah, please subscribe to the YouTube channel.
Yeah. Philosophically, you know, we're down with that idea in general. If you want to come on this show as a guest, if you want to sponsor an episode because you have something that you need to get out there as a message, we're willing to talk to you. Email me at clarioncontent@gmail.com and we can talk about that kind of thing. If you're interested in writing a guest post on the Clarion content, we accept all writers. Our philosophy is grounded in this Benjamin Franklin sense. Benjamin Franklin used to talk about it in terms of printers, and in his day, printing was a really exclusive technology.
Yeah.
So printers had a duty to print all print points of view, because otherwise people who couldn't afford their own printing technology couldn't get their pamphlets out. Well, in a lot of ways, the internet has democratized that a little bit. But if you have word you want to get out, if you have stuff that you want to say, if you have a story that needs to be told, we're here. You can get us on YouTube. You can come at us on the internet. You know, you can publish a guest piece on the Clarion content. You can hit us up on Twitter. We love this place. I think all three of us, that's one thing we have in common. It's a super fun place to spend time, to live, to raise kids, to go out and do things. Great place to eat. It's a little cold today, but as Chris said, maybe we're turning into the new San Francisco.
Yeah, where your weather just goes crazy every single day, and you have winter in the summer.
Yes, well,
summer in the winter.
Hopefully we'll get our usual spring that we get in Durham on Valentine's Day. All this stuff will bloom. I can see flowers blooming in the
daffodils.
Daffodils,
aspiring,
right? I can see year-round flowers in the cocoa cinnamon planters. Yeah. So thanks, Chris. I really appreciate doing these with you.
Thank
Josh.
you, Aaron. Thank you, Josh.
Yeah.
Thanks for watching Sights on the City.